Have a really special one, as I think you all know. My name is Nick Ferris. I am the treasurer for the Telegraph Hill Dwellers. We are one of the oldest neighborhood organizations in the country. It is our goal to celebrate, beautify, and protect San Francisco's most unique and historic neighborhoods. You don't have to live in North Beach or Telegraph Hill to become a member. You just need to feel passionately about this city. So if you enjoy this event, or if you enjoyed any of the ones that we've done, we encourage you, please join. We'd love to hear from you. There's a ton of ways to get involved. Now, on that note, I would like to do some very quick introductions for our guests today. We are incredibly lucky to have these two people. Tim Redmond, he is the editor and founder of 48 Hills. Man, are we lucky to have Tim and 48 Hills in San Francisco. He has been pushing progressive values and issues in San Francisco for a long time now. I remember when I first moved back to San Francisco, I was quickly put onto 48 Hills, and it's been a tremendous resource for me. So very grateful for that. But of course, the man of the hour, Mr. Tom Ammiano. I don't know what to say about him. I think everyone is obviously very familiar with him, particularly if you've lived in San Francisco for a bit. Tom has spent time in Vietnam teaching. He has focused a lot of his career around education. He started off on the board of education. He's a former supervisor, assembly member, my personal favorite, a comedian. I think he really breaks the mold for how people perceive politicians in a very great and inspiring way for many. Now, before I pass over the reins to Tim, just two really quick housekeeping items for everyone. One, we have allocated time at the end for some questions. So if you have any, please submit them via the chat at the side of the window. And people can vote on questions if you want to upvote them. And then secondly, at the end of this webinar, we'll be doing a live virtual raffle. So THD has purchased 2 of Tom's new book, Kiss My Gay Ass, My Trip Down the Yellow Brick Road Through Activism, Stand-Up, and Politics. So 2 lucky folks will win those at the end. All right, that's it for me. Tim, stage is all yours.
Thank you so much, Nick. And I'm always really, really happy to be speaking to the Telegraph Hill Dwellers. And tonight, I'm not going to be speaking much. The stage is mostly for Tom. I just want to say this is his new book. Kiss My Gay Ass, My Trip Down the Yellow Brick Road Through Activism, Stand-Up, and Politics. We have been working for years to get Tom to write his book. He's always kept saying, I got to write a book, I got to write a book. And we finally got him to actually sit down and do some recordings and do some writing. And we put this thing together. So now we finally have the book out that it was published by Bay Guardian Books, my former employer before it shut down the Bay Guardian, but I still have the rights to the name and the imprint. So if you're interested in a copy, you can win one tonight. You can also go to SFBG for San Francisco BayGuardian.com, and you can order one online. And our fulfillment's actually pretty good. You should get it within the week or so. It's $20 plus $5 for the shipping. Well worth every penny. So we're going to start off tonight. Tom is going to read a section from his book about comedy. And then we're going to talk a little bit about comedy, politics, Sacramento, San Francisco. And we'll leave plenty of time at the end for your questions, because I know people have a lot of questions for Tom. And this is an opportunity to get his wisdom after all of his years in politics about some of the things that are happening today. So why don't I turn it over to you, Tom, and you can start us off with a dramatic reading.
Hello, everyone, and especially to the Telegraph Hill Dwellers. Very familiar with your group. Always felt that you were a very smart group and very, very hands-on, and I always liked that. And yeah, I want to really thank Tim and your local boy, John Gollinger, because without them, there would be no book. And I'm very grateful to them for that. And I asked around what I thought you'd be interested in. Some people didn't know about my comedy career, so I thought I would read a chapter about that to you. It's chapter 8. It's called Funny is Funny, which is a quote from Jose Simon, who was the founder of Comedy Day. When he came to see us at the Valencia Rose, us meaning out gay comics. We were a rare breed. And a lot of people told him he shouldn't look or consider us for Comedy Day because we were gay. And God love him, he came himself to the Valencia Rose and saw Monica Palacios and Marga Gomez and me. And that was his comment after that to the people who said, you know, they're gay. It's not going to work. He said, funny is funny. So thank you, Jose, who's no longer with us. Okay. When I started doing comedy, my material was all political and current events. I even brought in some of my teacher props from the classroom. I would make jokes about what the pictures really were. I joked a lot about Reagan and Bush and Jesse Helms, and a conservative woman or an interesting woman who was a San Francisco supervisor, Wendy Nelder. I had lots of jokes about Dianne Feinstein and her Planet of the Apes hairdo. Comedy was exciting. I almost thought for a minute maybe that showbiz dream would come true. I even got covered by the famed San Francisco Chronicle columnist Herb Caen. He became a fan of the Valencia Rose comics and would mention our jokes in his columns regularly. And for those of you who know that time and era and Herb, that was gold to get mentioned in his column. The killer thing was, I'm so sorry. Here's an inside thing. One of the most popular comics at the time was Bobby Slayton. I think Bobby Slayton was very professional. Let's just say, because of those times, he wasn't exactly warm and fuzzy to anyone in his material, but his gay stuff was his primary target. He made a lot of homophobic jokes. Then he would say to me or whoever, uh-oh, I didn't mean it. Funny is funny. All right. The killer thing was that we looked a lot alike. We could even pass for brothers or twins. So there's me, the big gay guy, and him with the big gay jokes. I know that he hated the resemblance to me because people brought it up all the time. A long time ago, somebody put me on the phone with him. And I said, I remember you, Bobby. He said, yeah, Ammiano. And I said, yeah, I heard you were in the movie Dreamgirls. He goes, yeah, I said, I haven't seen it. He goes, you haven't seen it? What kind of fag are you? There we are. I broke my ass to get on Frank Zamacone's Comedy Tonight on KQED because I thought it would give me exposure, but they would never put me on. So I said, why aren't you putting openly gay people on? They said, well, we did. We had Marga on and we had Kate Clinton on, but they weren't really allowed in their material to be openly gay. I'm not judging them. I'm just saying they just wouldn't do it. Sometimes in comedy, you worry, maybe I'm not that good, a lot. So that's like the reason. Then there were straight comics that aren't that good either. And I knew I was good enough. How's that for now?
That sounds great, Tom. You know, I have to ask you, can you tell the story about the flop sweat?
Yeah, I can read it.
Actually. And the United States Senator?
Right. All right, here we go. Well, I thought I had it. Okay. Anyway, I'll have to tell it to you because I didn't mark the book. So we got a phone call, my office, when I was an assemblyman from somebody doing a story about Al Franken because he had just been elected. And as we know, he was very funny. He was on the Saturday Night Live and also other comedy venues. And so the interviewer wanted to know if I had any advice for him. So I said, well, good luck, blah, 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 and you don't have to ever worry about flop sweat. Well, flop sweat in the biz is a phenomena that happens when you're bombing and there's no response from the audience except get off the stage, you suck. and you just can't save yourself. Everything you do comes out wrong, and you break out in this very potent sweat, and it smells, and you get drenched. So that's what flop sweat meant to me. And I did have that experience more than once. If you ever watch The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, you'll see. So after that article appeared in something in Washington, the Capital Weekly, I'm not sure, with my quote about flop sweat, the office got a call, and it was a guy who was connected with the Urban Dictionary. And he wanted my office to know, in the Urban Dictionary, the definition of flop sweat was the sweat that accumulated under your balls when you were having sex. Nice. So there I am. And poor Al Franklin, I hope this didn't curse him, because I liked him as a senator.
So there's the connections between comedy and politics run deep, and we'll talk more about that tonight.
Flop sweat. Yeah, we're not going to mention the other part. You gotta have
I thought I'd start off, Tom, with our conversation talking about, since we recently lost, on a more sobering note, we recently lost one of the great heroes of San Francisco LGBT politics, Harry Britt, died recently. And, one of the things that you talk about in your book is some of the unsung heroes of the LGBT movement, some of the people who were your heroes, Ron Lanza, Harry Britt, although he was an unsung hero, Howard Wallace. I wonder if you could talk for a few minutes about some of the people who you knew in the day, many of whom are no longer with us, but who were kind of the unsung heroes of the LGBT movement.
Yeah. So they were warriors, men and women. There will be nothing in my mind, looking back over almost 80 years now, that was as transformative and fun as gay liberation, not to trivialize it. But it was a real lefty phenomenon. It was an activist dynamic. And through it, I met some wonderful people.
Tom, what year are we talking about here? Let me interrupt. What year are we talking about here when Bay Area Gay Liberation was founded?
Well, that was 1970.
1970. Okay, yeah. Keep going.
And they were very left, and because everybody gets so sectarian, it only lasted a year. However, the combination of becoming aware of social justice issues. I was a teacher then, and I knew that things were really screwed up, especially for Latino kids and Black kids. So it was maybe not, Bagel wasn't always the most welcoming place, a lot of contention, but I learned a lot. And then I formed, comradeships that lasted to the end of people's lives. And one of those people was Hank Wilson, who started the hotel in the Tenderloin that served people who were always marginalized, and also offered on a shoestring social services. They were way ahead of their time and had a lot of trouble being funded. And Ron Lanza, who was one of the first openly gay teachers to come out, and we, the quartet of us, went forward with something called Gay Teachers here in San Francisco, and eventually had some success with the San Francisco Unified, and of course associated ourselves with Harvey Milk, who was one of the few who was on the ascendary in the gay community who came to the Gay Teachers meetings and gave us credibility, because the upper class, what we call the gays, were not interested in us coming out and in quotes, rocking the boat. And there was a wonderful woman named Barbara Arms, who was always there. You could always count on her. I don't think people remember her name very much. She's also, I don't believe, with us. And she added a lot of aplomb. And there was a host of other people. And, you may not see them in the movies, about Harvey Milk, or you may not read about them in the Randy Schiltz book or all that. And the interesting thing to me is they're fine with that. But like I say in the intro, the stage for gay liberation and, even my life, is crowded with a lot of people whose shoulders you stand on. And many of them are not known.
And, you've touched on this, but in the early days of what you're calling gay liberation, there was a lot of what we today call intersectionality, that it wasn't just about gay rights, it was about social transformation, right? And there were a lot, and you were involved in a lot of other progressive issues. Can you talk a little bit about that kind of intersectionality in the early days?
Getting a plug-in for Harvey, that was one of the things he did. One of the first people that, was recognized, not just because he was gay, but because he connected the dots. And that had a lot to do with his success and his charm and his effectiveness. He recognized the problems that the Chinese community had voting. He recognized the disabled, which hardly anybody did. And he knew and supported transgender people. And we're talking in the early 70s. So, as I think the teaching part of my career taught me a lot about the intersectionality, because the kids came, mostly they were poor, but they came from different backgrounds. And I think the teacher part radicalized me even more when I realized the kids that I taught in special ed were not in any way impaired. They were only monolingual. However, they were in special ed and tracked for life because they didn't do well on tests that were administered in English. Well, of course not. And I was naive and young. And, as soon as I realized that most of those kids were smarter than I was, I went to the school district and I just said, oh, you've made a terrible mistake. These kids are in no way cognitively or intellectually challenged. They just don't speak English, and that's what we need to do for them. And the district, of course, said to me, our way or the highway. And that really pissed me off. And that's when I started to get active in the community of the mission, because there were groups, the MCO, Mission Coalition, and other groups who were very upset by how Latinx kids were being treated. And bilingual was a big controversial issue. And the Chinese community got Ben Tom elected, the first Asian American elected to the school board. And I guess I can tell the real reason that he was on there is to challenge the ban on bilingual that was happening. And he was involved in a lawsuit called Nicholas versus Lau. And that resulted in bilingual education not only being mandated, but also being supported. So, and then there were the Black psychiatrists had a movement to have a moratorium on IQ tests because the IQ tests were so loaded, very white, very upper class, very heterosexual, I may say. All those things complemented each other. And they certainly helped me, inform me, especially when I got elected. And of course, AIDS happened. That was a game changer. And during my election, my first election particularly, because of the community, I was able to open the doors and be a voice that they really hadn't had. So on that order.
Tom, we're going to talk more about politics, but I just want to shift back for a second to your teaching. You also taught in Vietnam, and you taught in Vietnam in the middle of the war, while other people were shooting guns at Vietnamese people, and Vietnamese people were shooting guns at U.S. people, and there was a horrible war going. You were in the middle of all this, but you were a teacher. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, it was like a private Peace Corps. It was called IVS, International Voluntary Services, and that was a mouthful in Vietnamese. Gok Quan Chi Nguyen. Yes, we had to learn Vietnamese. Mine was from the heart. I usually had a Vietnamese friend who would then translate my Vietnamese. And we were assigned, Quaker in origin. Near the end, because I was there from 66 to 68, we started to attract people who were COs, conscientious objectors. But when I applied, it was more, the draft had just started and Vietnam was just perking. Kennedy was still president when my draft board called me up, and I got a pass. I had asthma. They asked for a verification that I had asthma. I got the verification, and they gave me what they call 4F. 4F meant you could not be drafted because of medical reasons. I'm ashamed to say I think that's what Trump got. There, we'll leave it there. So when this came to my attention that there was something called IVS, because I still had the bug, to travel, and, you're a little bit of a do-gooder. I applied to IVS, and I think they were pretty desperate at the time because, who wanted to go to Laos or Vietnam? So from 66 to 68, I was in Vietnam, mostly teaching English at a Vietnamese high school in a town called Ninh Hoa. And I always make a joke that, a lot of the students I taught spoke English with a New Jersey accent. This is a dog. This is a dog. And became very acquainted with the dynamics of the war, most of which was kept from the American public. And it was heavy. It was and I felt very guilty for being there. It really was a civil war, and we had no place there. I went to 16 years of Catholic school, and I'm kind of what they call a recovering Catholic. And the Catholic Church there was very right-wing, very what we call Frenchified. There's a lot of classism in Vietnam. And I remember Cardinal Spellman, if you remember him in New York, he was really a war hawk and very instrumental in prolonging the Vietnamese War. And as an aside, everyone knew that he was a closet queen, and his nom de plume was Fanny. So in and of itself, my experience there for me, again, was another transformative experience. However, what I learned came at a great sacrifice on the part of the Vietnamese people. One of the most rewarding things that is happening is a lot of the children of the students that I had, who then emigrated and were refugees actually in America. Now they're writing books and narratives and expositions about Vietnam through their parents' eyes and sometimes through theirs. That is terrifically rewarding because that's different than an American or someone not Vietnamese sharing their perspectives on Vietnam. And their books are very powerful and actually make me feel foolish sometimes. So when I came back from Vietnam in 68, IVS was basically kicked out because we exposed the head of IVS at the time, Don Luce, exposed a phenomenon called the tiger cages, where our side tortured the other side and put them in cages, a technique they learned from the French. And so we exposed that. This fellow who was in charge of, to the great embarrassment of the military and the U.S. government, it got out and got a lot of coverage in Time magazine, etc. And so we were basically kicked out because of what we did. It took about a year for us to leave, and not willingly, but unwillingly. So I got to put my full 2 years in.
Talk about the night of the Tet Offensive.
The Tet Offensive happened in 1968 in February. Tet was a big deal, big Megillah. The whole country, the war many times went on a truce. They had a stealth, in quotes, a surprise attack. They sometimes called it an invasion, but that's ridiculous because it was Vietnam. By the North Vietnamese during Tet. They took advantage of the fact that most people would be celebrating or not thinking anything was going to happen, although apparently a lot of people knew. A lot of people in the Vietnamese knew. Americans didn't know. And it was a very serious attack. Finally, they called it the Tet Offensive. So I had some neighbors, a lovely family, and the son knocked on the door and he said, I wonder if I could stay over tonight. And, it was a little unusual because I live right next door, but I was very close with the family. They told me why they didn't like Americans, but they liked me. And then I acted as an intermediary when the father was detained and put in prison. They couldn't go see him, but I could. Anyway, that was another story. So as the night progressed, we started to hear rockets and noises, and I had a back door that blew open if a howitzer went off that was in the hills. I always said, oh, it's a ghost. So all these things were happening, and the young man said, Mr. Tom, I think we should get under the beds. So, all right, what is this? So in the morning, he explained what he knew. And of course, the world was hearing about it. It was called the Tet Offensive. So I lived in a very small town that was surrounded by rural areas, and many families, because they're the ones that got screwed the most. They were in between the South Vietnamese and the North Vietnamese, which were appellations that were totally political, but, were very serious. And so they fled from the outer regions into my small town, families and dogs and cats and all that. And they walked in the night. And so they knocked on my door and they said, Mr. Tom, we need a place for shelter because we're afraid we're going to get shot. So, of course we said yes. So I think it was about 60 people came into the house, and they had accordion doors, and they closed the doors and locked them up tight. It was getting to be nightfall. And the friends of mine said the way the house was, there was a squat toilet, and above the toilet, there was a water basin, a little water tank. And they asked me and you could get up to just use a ladder. And they asked me if I would hide, because if discovered with those families, it would have been curtains. So I hid in that water tower pretty much overnight. And I tell the story in the book, and there a little Costa Nieda experience, there was a chameleon, they called them geckos, in there with me, which eventually I had a conversation with. So in the morning, people were being very, very quiet, and I was getting whispered to. And then the big bad wolf, bang, 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 bang. And as I said, it was an accordion door, and it squeaked and made a lot of noise when you opened it and closed it. So they came back and said, make sure you're quiet. And they opened the door, and the North Vietnamese soldiers came in with guns, not pointed, but, and looked around, and there was an exchange and all that. And talk about flop sweat. And then finally they left. And I didn't hear anything. And I thought, oh, shit. But then I heard the door, and I knew it closed. So then there was a subtle murmuring, and, the friends came back, and they said, okay, we think the coast is clear, but you really need to get out of Ninois. You just can't stay here. And, there was very rudimentary communications, and those were cut off. So as luck had it, soon after that, a helicopter landed in a soccer field across from where we were staying. And that seemed like the opportune moment for me to split and not endanger these people any further. And that was a trip, because I ran out to the helicopter, and they all got out, and it was a very big, very corpulent, with guns, American soldiers. And, they were kind of, shall we put, stereotypic about who and what was Vietnamese. And I guess give to my stature and the fact, that I didn't weigh very much, they thought I was Vietnamese. And I'm shouting at them, I need a lift. I need a lift. I need to go to Detroit. I need to get out of here. And the guy said to his commanding officer, I got some Vietnamese guy here, and he's speaking English, and he's saying he needs to be out. I said, no, I'm not Vietnamese. And anyway, they recognized that. And I really don't know what their purpose was. They looked around and let me on the helicopter, and we took off for the prefecture, I want to say, the regional capital, Nha Trang. And I had to look down and see all the people. They waved, as if this was an everyday occurrence, and they weren't threatened. And so that's my little narrative about that. And I did go back in a few months, and I pretty much stayed there to the end of '68.
We're going to go on with our conversation, but I just want to take a second here and say, in about 10 minutes, we're going to stop and take questions. So if you want to put questions in the chat, I will go through them, and I will endeavor to pull them out and read them to Tom, and he can answer them. So go ahead, and if you want to, start queuing up questions in the chat. If you have some, I'm sure you do. So Tom, let's come back a little more to the present, or closer to the present. You were in the State Assembly. You were the chair of the Public Safety Committee.
Yes.
And you had a lot to do. You did a lot of work on police reform. In fact, you tried really hard for a long time to get civilian oversight for the BART police back when they were shooting people and there was no one watching and no one was paying attention.
And they shot Oscar Grant.
Right. And you were trying to get civilian oversight. So talk a little bit about your experiences then trying to get civilian oversight for the police and how you think that's different now, because I think we're in a moment now where Berkeley just cut, I think, 25 or 30% of their spending on the police force last night, and they're going to there's no longer going to be Berkeley police handing out traffic tickets. That's going to be civilianized. And we're starting to talk about defunding the police in San Francisco. So put your historical experience dealing with that in Sacramento to work with where we are today.
Well, I'll explain the context, which was I always had struggles with BART as a supervisor. And there were killings that the BART police did. And sometimes people of color, or not, one at 16th and Mission. And I was always told, butt out, because this is a state agency. So when I got to Sacramento, the very first couple of weeks I was there, Oscar Grant was murdered by the BART police. And the climate for police reform was barren. The police and law enforcement people had a real hold on the legislature. The problem wasn't just Republicans, of course. One of them, by the way, was a former cop who got elected. That was always fun. was the what I call dinos, the moderate Democrats. Trying to round them up and get them to support some of the progressive ideas around the police. And there were some state organizations too, like the League of City Voters, and they had a great lobbying effort. And their public safety committee was all former cops. So anything that smelled about reform would set off alarm bells, and the lobbyists would go crazy. And a lot of them gave a lot of money to Democrats as well, and the League of City Voters. So there was quite a bit of things stacked against you. But, I went forward anyway, and, wanted citizen, you're going to laugh. I said, do away with the bar police, and then I said, and then we want real citizen review, real citizens really reviewing. And then we set a whole bunch of standards around training. There's actually some organizations, Post, it's an acronym, that they're set up to monitor. They're police, they're law enforcement themselves, and they had guidelines, and they were good. They were good, about the training, and who would make it and who wouldn't. So pretty much, the guy who represented that district in Oakland, I had offered to work with him. He said it wasn't necessary. So I had my hopes up, but then the word got out, and I think the police unions talked to the colleague from Oakland, and then he got involved. And long story short, what finally did get out was extremely watered down. Now, it was better, but it wasn't what we wanted. And the future history of BART, because there have been shootings since that day, and there was even a BART officer who shot another officer at home. So what happened, like with the training? So I'm just saying BART has still a long way to go. And I still like this model of, do we need BART police? Could we have other types of enforcement, like people are suggesting with defund the cops and stuff? So that was a good lesson. I think people learned that Ammiano, I guess, is going to be around for a while and push these things. And for me, I saw the lay of the land, because you got to remember, not only were some of the people Democrats, they were fairly decent. So, at first you personalize and you go, the sense of betrayal. How could they be late? One guy, we waited and waited for vote, and finally we had to close the meeting where my bill went down, and he showed up pretending, oh, was I late? So, I'm telling you, this is the stuff that goes on. So I realized they weren't betraying me. They were betraying the community that they were elected to represent, particularly, and this is always the case, people who are poorer or marginalized. So that was a fast lesson. I knew it from San Francisco, but that really is it. Because, you're on TV, you publicize the bill, you get pro, you get con, you have hearings, you get threatened. And then you have an enormous vote on the assembly floor, and it's all televised and covered. So the scale of the rebuttal was, remember, I was a supervisor with Frank Jordan, remember him, and Newsom and Willie Brown, and they rejected a lot. But the scale of this first shoot down about police reform was really a gut punch. And I knew that I couldn't let it be that, So.
Tom, we got a very interesting question here from one of our attendants who says, what was your experience in the legislature with then Assembly member, now Congress member Karen Bass, who is being considered by Biden to be his vice presidential running mate? Do you think she would be a good choice?
Yes, in a way, and I've been touting her. I'm a full confession. I'm going to come out of the closet. I'm a Bernie delegate. So I'm, as a Luddite, which I explained to Tim and Mr. Ferris, I'm on a lot of platforms I'd never heard of before, et cetera. And on those platforms, I speak highly of Karen. But initially, we didn't do too well. There had been some suppression around LGBT issues in the assembly, which even with openly gay members, and those before me did a great job, mostly women, Migdon, Kehoe, and Goldberg, and then Sheila Kuehl. There's always, what I call laissez-faire homophobia. So they stopped doing, because it caused some discomfort to some of the dinos, the Democrats and the Republicans. They stopped doing gay pride. Once, they did every time, women's, whatever, once a year, they did get used to, and they had stopped it, where you honor some people from the queer community, and then there's a little ceremony. And that hadn't happened in years. So poor Karen, John Perez and I, who then became the first speaker, first Latinx and first gay person, went to Karen. Now, Karen knew me because I introduced the legalized marijuana thing. And, the Democratic Party wasn't ready for that. And so I got summoned to Karen's office. And she was very, very, sympathetic. Well, Karen is a great listener. And she told me what the problems would be for her and the party and other members on my bill around marijuana. And she thought I should withdraw it because I would never get a second. You introduce the bill in committee, and then you go to hear the bill. Can I have a second? So that was a pretty dire warning. So I explained to her my position, and there was no bad feelings. Of course, I start scheming. How am I going to get around this? I like Karen. How can I get to her in this? And then, of course, we came with the first LGBT ceremony in many years. And it was a success. There was pushback on doing it. Some from people you think would know better. Some Republicans came up to me and intimated that this was going to be like a drag show, that last year a transgender, they couldn't even say the word, was honored, and I told them, hey, this isn't a TNA. This is a serious thing, and they should get over themselves. So I think, we established a little beachhead there. And we had that we weren't fooling around, the openly gay people and the people we represented. And we had good success with a lot of the LGBT bills. And in some ways, we became the flavor of the month. And so people, we're going to sign up for that. Yeah, Tom, no conversion therapy. But then the issue was, like with Gavin and other people, they could point to things they supported directly for LGBT, marriage and this and that. But they weren't there for the disenfranchised LGBT, the poor LGBT, and the people who really didn't benefit from gay marriage. But what they needed was reform of housing and reform of health and reform of education. So if you voted, it almost became cosmetic. And then, of course, you had to educate a lot of LGBT people. One of them once said to me during a big fight, well, so-and-so marched in the gay parade, so, why should you criticize them? I said, well, they might have marched in the parade, but they didn't vote for the Lesbian Gay Speakers Bureau or whatever the issue was. So that pretty much was the climate. There was an actual Minuteman there. You remember the militia? So this guy got elected and was very proud of being a Minuteman. I always told people that's what his wife called him. And anyway, he used to stand up and talk about my sexual preference and Mr. Ammiano and all these nasty things. And then I one time respond, I said, you know, you're always talking about my sexual preference. Well, here's a little education for you. My sexual orientation is gay. My sexual preference is Brad Pitt. So,
but you think you think Karen Bass would be a good candidate for vice president?
Yes, in a nutshell. She's a great. After that, you know, after all, I was new. She was new. We got along very well. She was very supportive, and again, she is a good listener, and I can't tell you how important that is. And I could learn from that too. And she's progressive. So I think Biden could benefit. I really think so.
I know that you have had a lot of criticism of Gavin Newsom over time, particularly Gavin Newsom liking to claim credit for things that you did. I know that he had to be dragged kicking and screaming into supporting Healthy San Francisco, and then suddenly he's running for governor and says, oh, I brought healthcare to San Francisco. But one of the questions here is, regarding California's response to the coronavirus, is there anything you would do differently than Newsom or Breed?
Well, Newsom, you know, what he's doing now, yeah, let's put it this way. The bar is low. So we have Caligula, you know, in the White House. And so there really is no comparison. And remember, when you're talking about Newsom and Breed, but particularly Newsom, think about presidential ambitions, because that's a very important element. And, you know, I think he's on the road. So given that, you know, I think my husband always said, Gavin loves you. Must be your boyfriend. The issue I have is not going far enough, appropriating other people's ideas, and follow through. And if he can meet all three challenges like that, you know, I'm tempered already around him, because, you know, seeing him up close and being a supervisor, we were at odds all the time. You know, with Breed, it's kind of the same thing. There's a gap. There's or almost a chasm between what I see as her politics, you know, to make it simple, and mine. And the homeless issue, I believe we don't need a solution. We have the solutions. But somehow in the mayor's office and under Breed administration, we're not making things any easier. And a lot of it is lip service or coming along screaming and hollering. And I don't care for that either. You know, just fucking do it. It's the moral imperative. And the situation gets worse anyway. The other issue is, for both of them, I want charter reform. We have now what's called a strong mayor. If you're acquainted with regional politics, Sam Liccardo in San Jose is introducing, sounds like Putin in a way, a charter amendment that would let him stay in office more and have say over the police, some other things. And that's called the strong mayor's office. And of course, you know, even liberals will say, well, you know, if you get to be mayor, the way it's set up, you can nominate people to the such and such thing. You can, you have so much influence and this and that. Yeah, but there's a trade-off there. And the trade-off is, the way our charter reads, it's really too much power. It's not sharing power. Listen, there are so many hidden pots of money that every mayor has. And that's why I always go, when they don't have money for a social justice issue, they say there's no money for this. but there's money to build the jail. Whatever the comparison is, I always say there's been enough money. So I would like to see a charter amendment. I'd like to see charter reform. And I think this group, the Telegraph Hill Dwellers, could be very, instrumental if that's ever introduced. Sometimes you can go to the ballot and set up a commission. You can do it a number of ways. And I'd like that to be one of the issues. So, of course, they both, as mayors, wouldn't support that. And, would probably be in opposition to it. So,
well, Tom, you bring up that, and we're getting close on time here. I know you wanted to talk about this, and one of our questioners says, any insights into SF corruption? It has been going on for decades. Fuller investigations are now taking place. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with corruption at City Hall, and also some of the things you think that can be done about it? What we're talking about, there's a measure to split up the Department of Public Works. There's a measure to create an Office of the Public Advocate. Talk a little bit about your experience here, and then what do you think we can do about it?
The first time I got elected, I was at City Hall thinking, oh my God, what am I going to do now? And I was walking down the hall, and this guy came up to me, and apparently he was well known in certain circles, and handed me an envelope. And I'm so out of it, I think that this is like a note saying, congratulations, there was money in the envelope. And I said, I can't take this. Imagine today with the cameras. And he looked a little flustered, and, he took it back. And I'm just saying, that was, pretty out there. Some lobbyists used to come by to influence. They'd invite you to dinner, or one time this guy who represented an entity I wouldn't want to embarrass, they sent him because he was younger and cute, which was an insult. And he wanted to invite me to lunch at Stars. And I said, why don't we meet at It's Tops, if you remember It's Tops. Fortunately, it just closed. So basically, he intimated, they're very clever, that he could raise maybe $25,000 for me at a fundraiser if I was sympathetic to the entity. And I told him no, and I really don't want to embarrass who he represented. So I'll just tell you their initials, PG&E. As an example of, there were times, and this is whenever I was first elected in the 90s, I thought I had somebody's vote. And as I walked into the chamber, it was being blocked, that hallway, by lobbyists. So all the supervisors had to go through that gauntlet if they took that route. And so many times I'd be expecting an aye vote, and whoever the supervisor would walk through that gauntlet, come down and then vote no. It happened more than once. In terms of the future, the lobbyists learned to hate me because I did introduce a lot of legislation and supported the Ethics Commission, worked with folks like Larry Bush on, of course we worked on the Ethics Commission reform, but also public financing. As a matter of fact, I had a ballot measure, Prop G. I'd only been on the board 1 year, and the National Lobbyist Association spent, I don't know how much money against me. And they had signs and vote no on Prop G. And Tom Ammiano, this is Tom Ammiano's brain. And we thought, oh my God, we're screwed. We had 10 cents, and the damn thing passed, despite all the money and the campaign that they passed. So mostly lobbyists stopped seeing me, stopped bothering, and tried to work around. And in Sacramento, that was pretty much the same case. But I did see the heavy influence of lobbyists, PG&E, AT&T, Disney, realtors, Jarvis Gann, gun control people. My God, the NRA was there. They came so often, I thought that we should get to know each other. The NRA came to the Public Safety Committee, you know, with a really horrible bill about guns, and they knew I wasn't going to support it. And the NRA guy was a big guy. He was very, not loud, but he was forceful. And he stood up, you know, this is during testimony, pro and con. And he goes, Assemblyman Ammiano, I really think you should come with me to the shooting range and you should learn about guns and get the whole picture. And I said, are you asking me for a date? Well, that took care of that. And I got to say, a lot of his pals laughed a lot and he was pretty pissed off. So, yeah, way too much still today. Do you think
a public advocate would help? Do you think having a public advocate would help?
Well, that is it's another reason. Yes. And now a public advocate has some controversy, but those people who are most against it, listen to what they're saying. Now, public advocate is independent of the board and of the mayor. So in the case of Nuru, you wouldn't have had that wink, 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 and then sometimes complete compliance. Because the public advocate could have recognized that, or someone could blow the whistle and went to the public advocate and have no consequences. And that's only one thing. So I hope people support a public advocate. You know, the lobbyists are against it. The people who have most influence on board members, and they use all kinds of, phony reasons. It's another level of government, which is quite the opposite. It'll be too expensive, which it isn't. I could go on, but when it's, we need one more vote for the ballot next Tuesday. I think we're going to get it. And then I hope everyone pays attention to the campaign because we get, very expository about it, especially around things like parking. You'd be surprised what a public advocate could do around the issue that drives so many people crazy. So I'll stop. Thank you for that question, though, because that's important. Tom,
we've had you for an hour, which is what we bargained for. Really appreciate it. I'm going to turn this back over to Nick, and you can't really kind of applaud that much online. But Tom, thank you so much for being with us and sharing all of this with us tonight.
Sure. Yeah. And I guess you could say I have strong opinions, and we'll leave it at that. But I'm looking at some of the comments, and everybody's very supportive, but they want to know this and that about that issue. And I mean, we could do that another time. And I would love to hear more about Karen Bass and all things like that. So.
Yeah. So look, we'll get to the raffle in just a second for all attendees. But look, on behalf of everyone here, I'd like to say a very big thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tim. I think this has been a lot of fun. It's been educational. I learned a new term. Tom, thank you. Flop sweat. Right way to use that one.
You and Tim. You can imagine my poor legislative aide, right? Hello. Flop.
So look at Tom's book. It is super easy. It's a super easy and engaging read. We're going to be sending out a link to his book in a survey email that you'll receive later today. THC's next event will be on August 13th. We're doing a virtual wine tasting. We're actually partnering with Maritime Wine Bar, who's located right here in North Beach. If you want to get tickets, follow us on Facebook. Subscribe to our newsletter. That's the best way to stay in touch. And again, if you enjoyed this event, if you care about this neighborhood and want to help make it a better place, please become a member today. You don't even need to live here. It's just $35 for an individual. $25 for a senior for a whole year. So if you like that, please go to thd.org.
And I'm hoping that there'll be the time that I can come in person.
Yep. Would love that. Absolutely.
At that one, I'll wear pants. So.
So look, let's get to the raffle here, guys.